Hello everyone, today's story is on Cynthia Coffman, who was sentenced to death for killing 4 women. To date, 60-year-old Cynthia is currently on death row in California and has no scheduled execution date. Also, no living woman has spent longer on an American death row than Cynthia.
Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Cynthia Coffman was born on January 19, 1962 in St. Louis, Missouri. Her mother and successful businessman father were a couple, but her father eventually abandoned the family, leaving her mother to raise at least 3 children on her own. Fortunately for Cynthia, her mother came from a wealthy family, so she and her siblings lived comfortably and she grew up privileged. They were also raised Catholic and were taught about religion from a very young age. Despite her religious background, Cynthia fell in love with a boy when she was in high school and ended up getting pregnant at 17. Her and the child's father did get married, but their relationship was a horrible one. Her husband frequently assaulted her, and for years, she felt as if she could not do anything about it. After 5 years of being in a horrible, rocky relationship, Cynthia mustered up enough strength to pack her bags and escape to Page, Arizona. She left without her child and a small amount of clothes. It was now fall of 1985 in Page, Arizona. Cynthia began waiting tables, and after only a few weeks of being in Arizona, she met up with a local criminal by the name of James Marlowe. James was born in 1957 and started his criminal career at the age of 10. He was sentenced to 3 years at the Folsom Prison for a series of home invasions. In prison, he became well known and established within the Aryan Brotherhood and sported Aryan and neo-Nazi tattoos. Despite James being a gang member, a 6-time divorcee, and into drugs, Cynthia moved in with him in his apartment. Their partying was too much for their neighbors, though, and because of the constant complaints, they were evicted from their apartment. Even though they were out of a stable place to live, they were still living it up. James had family in California, so they would bum places to sleep, steal valuables from family members, and leave to mooch and steal off of someone else. Their fun temporarily ended on May 8, 1986, when Cynthia and James got pulled over in Barstow, California. The officer who was responsible for the traffic stop discovered a small loaded pistol and some meth in Cynthia's purse. The only reason for the traffic stop was because James's 6th wife reported her car stolen, and the car Cynthia and James were in was indeed his ex-wife's reported vehicle. Both Cynthia and James were locked up. James was sentenced to only 6 weeks in jail for the theft, though. Cynthia got out before James, so she was able to visit him in jail. When they were both finally free, they attempted to live off of family again, but James's family had enough with the couple, and they were forced to figure living situations out on their own. They started sleeping in the woods, and their living conditions were so bad at one point that Cynthia and James both got lice. They didn't have access to soap or water, so they doused themselves with kerosene just to kill the lice. Soon after their lice debacle, the couple began robbing people by breaking into their homes. They committed home invasions in California, Kentucky, and Tennessee before making their way back to California. They were able to steal cash, jewelry, and even a shotgun. Cynthia felt like Bonnie and was so in love with James that she got a tattoo in honor of him. The tattoo was on a butt cheek, and it said, "I belong to the Folsom Wolf." It was now October 11, 1986. Cynthia and James were on the hunt for easy prey. They found 32-year-old Sandra Neary in Costa Mesa, California. Sandra was at an ATM outside of her bank and was attempting to withdraw some money. They took her, killed her, and left her body for dead all the way in the city of Corona in Riverside County. Police were called because she never made it back to her car, and her car was still parked in the bank's parking lot. Unfortunately, Sandra's body was not found until October 24, 1986. 4 days later, on October 28, 1986, a 35-year-old woman named Pamela Simmons was reported missing in Arizona. Police believe she went missing while trying to withdraw money from her bank account. They did not know at the time that Cynthia and James were behind her murder as well. Cynthia and James left Arizona and made their way back to California, but this time in the city of Redlands. On November 7, 1986, 20-year-old Karina Novus vanished from her last known location. A few days later, Lionel Murray went missing, and she was last seen shopping at a local mall. She never returned home and never reached out to anyone after that day. Linnell's boyfriend was so worried that he decided to do some digging of his own. Linnell was a psychology student who worked, and she also had a date planned with her boyfriend that she missed. Her boyfriend searched for any traces of her and ended up finding her car outside of the dry cleaning shop where she worked. He reported her missing to the police, and after a search, Linnell's body was found the next day on November 8, 1986, inside of a motel room in Huntington Beach. Cynthia and James never stayed put, so they weren't caught. Police ended up finding Linnell's checkbook in Laguna Niguel inside of a trash dumpster. Also in the dumpster was a fast food takeout bag with the names Cynthia Coffman and James Marlowe on it. Murderers Cynthia and James were dumb and helpful enough to use their complete legal names. Detectives were then able to link Cynthia and James to a motel in San Bernardino. When authorities made it to the hotel, the manager opened the hotel room linked to them, and inside was evidence that Cynthia and/or James was practicing Linnell Murray's signature. Although authorities did not catch the couple that day, authorities knew they were closer to their trail, and a manhunt began to capture the killer couple. On November 14, 1986, police were given a tip that the couple was in Big Bear City, California. A lodge owner said he recognized his recent guests as Cynthia and James, but by the time the 100-man search team got to the lodge, Cynthia and James were nowhere to be found. The search team then spread out to search for the killer couple in the woods, and at 3 p.m., they were spotted hiking alongside a mountain road. Once Cynthia and James were spotted, they knew they had nowhere to run or hide, so they surrendered without a fight. After being arrested, detectives discovered that Cynthia and James were wearing clothes that they had stolen from the dry cleaning shop where one of their victims, Linnell, worked. After being questioned for a while, Cynthia admitted to killing Karina Novus, and she led officers to a vineyard near Fontana where they buried her in a shallow grave. Both Cynthia and James were charged with murder on November 17, 1986, and while awaiting trial, they were in jail with no bond. The separation between Cynthia and James proved to be too difficult, and their relationship did not last. While being locked up, they started to blame each other for the killings. Cynthia was so upset with James that when she received a jail visit from her lawyers, she pointed to her back when they asked her if she needed anything from the outside. After pointing, she told them that she needed help removing a tattoo that she got in honor of James. After sitting in jail for over 2 years, the couple's trial began on July 18, 1989. There was evidence stacked up against them. Fingerprints of Cynthia and James were found on Karina's car, and they were linked to a pawn shop where one victim's stolen typewriter was pawned. Cynthia and James were found guilty, and they were sentenced to death on August 30th. Cynthia was the first woman in California to be sentenced to death after the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Thank you all for watching another episode of Death Row Executions. Let me know what you guys think of this story in the comments below.